Hello, I'm Wendy Blom, Executive Director of Lowell Telecommunications Corporation. I'm going to serve as tonight's moderator. The issues of fairness in the criminal justice system, racial stereotyping and differential treatment of black suspects by police, violence and the prevalence of guns in our communities, and police safety are very hot topics right now. I felt it would be beneficial for LTC to provide a forum to discuss these important topics so that viewers at home could gain some perspective on their own community. Our goal tonight is to gain an understanding of Black and police perspectives so that making everyone feel safer is possible. We have a very impressive panel tonight. Thank you all for coming. On my left is Fru Nkenbeng. He's Cameroonian, Lowellian, and American. He's lived in Lowell for 30 years. In 1999, Fru became a member of the Lowell Police Community-Oriented Police Services. He's a founding member and former president of the African Cultural Association. He serves on several boards of directors, including LTC's. In 2015, his son was the target of racial slurs when he became the president of Lowell High School, which inspired community anti-racist actions. Captain Paul Laferriere has worked with the Lowell Police Department for 31 years. He's a practicing attorney, having graduated from Suffolk Law School in 1991, and he's a certified instructor in fair and impartial policing and procedural justice. Maritza Grooms. She's the teen coordinator at Girls Inc. of Greater Lowell. She was born in Lowell but raised in Boston. She came back to Lowell in 2012. She believes in community building and service, as well as providing platforms for young people to have a say in their community. She's a member of the Violence Prevention Coalition in Lowell and serves on various other boards and committees. Masada Jones is an artist and youth worker. She's the co-founder of Free Verse, an organization that teaches poetry and performance to youth in Lowell. She was named one of the 12 Magnificent Women of Lowell. Currently, Masada became the Assistant Director of the Extended Day Program at Lowell Community Charter Public School. Before this, she served as the Violence Prevention Coordinator at Teen Block of Lowell Community Health Center. She's one of the founders of Courageous Conversations, Why Talking About Race is Important. And Superintendent William Taylor was appointed to the Lowell Police Department in 1982. And in his 32-year career in the department has moved through the ranks from patrol officer to superintendent in 2013. In the 1990s, he was one of the founding members of the team that implemented community policing in Lowell. And thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to begin by just asking some questions so that you can each speak a little bit, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So Maritza, please tell us, what is the Black Lives Matter movement, and how does it express itself locally?
So it's my feeling that the Black Lives Matter movement is an affirmation of the value of Black lives. It is historically speaking that Black lives have been disproportionately killed, either through police brutality, disproportionately represented in mass incarceration, and extrajudicial killings. And our community has been plagued by poverty and lack of resources for pretty much since segregation happened. So Black Lives Matter to me is about unity and the love of Black lives, and it's calling for all of our communities to come together and just recognize that our lives matter too.
Okay, Captain Laferriere, how are police on the street trained to avoid racial stereotypes?
Well, lately what we've been doing is, because of the issues that have been happening, we have been training our officers at in-service every year in different ways of dealing with the public and in different ways of getting closer to the community. And actually, myself, I am a certified instructor in fair and impartial policing, as well as procedural justice, which are two of the topics that we teach. Now, we don't only teach Lowell police officers, we actually teach like 33 other communities also. So a lot of the communities that are in this Northeast area are getting the same training we are. And actually, Massachusetts, I believe it's mandated for this year that these two topics have to be talked about and trained by these officers. Just to give you an idea of exactly what they are, the fair and impartial policing looks at bias and looks at the fact that everyone is biased, no matter how you look at it. And if somebody tells you they're not, they're probably not telling you the truth. And so that even affects the police department. And what the object or the way that we look at it during the training is to make sure that officers are aware that there's bias out there and that bias comes into play every day of our jobs, but to also realize that our job is to put aside any bias that we may have and to actually treat everyone the same. And by doing that, you allow the people to, you work based on their actions. In other words, you don't do it based on the color of their skin or anything else in regards to who they are or where they live or anything. You should be basing your actions based on their actions as opposed to anything else. And the procedural justice part of it is that people want to be treated fairly by officers. They want to have a voice in what is going on, transpiring when they're dealing with police officers. And they want officers to be impartial as far as doing their job. And so what we want to try to do is to make sure that we do that so that people can feel comfortable and even if the results of what happens is not to their liking, a lot of people are willing to accept it. A prime example would be, say, getting a speeding ticket. There are certain outcomes that can happen. You potentially can get a ticket. You potentially cannot get a ticket. You potentially, but it's the interaction with the officer that is the most important thing. And people would feel that if they're being treated fairly and you're being impartial about how you're doing your job, that they're willing to accept the consequences, in other words, if they get the ticket. But even if, say, you didn't give them a ticket, but you treated them unfairly, that encounter is going to give them a bad taste. And so what we're trying to do is to make all officers understand that they need to be able to do this fairly, impartially, give them a voice in what they do. And for the most part, people are going to understand that. And we want people to look at it as he's doing his job. That's what he's there. We don't like what happened. We don't like the fact we got the ticket and that. But he treated us right, and he was doing his job. And that's what we're trying to show people. That's what we want them to understand that. And we're trying to make sure the officers are trying to show to the community also.
Is there buy-in among the officers on the street?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, we train about 1,200 officers a year in that. And like I said, everyone is really, because of what's been going on, really involved in making sure that we change our perceptions too, because it takes two to make things work.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Nkenbeng, what are your perceptions of the racial climate in the city? Do you think that some of the things that happened in the rest of the country that have been so upsetting because they've been captured on cameras and it's just so upsetting, do you think that could happen here?
Oh, definitely. Our city is really, it looks like a melting pot and look like the United Nations of cities. So it can happen here quickly too, because you have people from various backgrounds, from various cultures, and the perception and the way people look at things is quite different. So we come from different backgrounds and we look at things different. So there has to be an understanding and respect of people, not only by their looks, but try to see that we come from different cultures and we look at things differently. So I don't know if I fully understand your
Well, I guess I was asking specifically about your experience and your community's experience here in Lowell. Do they feel welcome or under threat or?
I can only speak for myself.
Sure.
My experience are unique, and every other experience is different. I can speak for myself because I've been in Lowell for over 31 years, and I've had a very positive relationship with the police, and I've also been involved and have friends and families who are police and respect them, and I teach my sons to behave well and respect the police. And that said, it also resonates within the community that they are not they are misunderstood and also misperceived generally as criminals and on the wrong side of the law. I would also say that when you look at it, that can come from a perspective of ignorance, because I, as an immigrant, there are different ways that I can react to a police than even an African American. Mm-hmm. Because when you lump us together, it's very confusing. I, as a Cameroonian, Lowellian American, can only have a different experience than an African American, because my perception coming from where I come from of the police is quite different. Mm-hmm. You see, when the police stops you, you might want to run away from the police, but here you run to the police because they are there to help you. Yeah. So, and that going to the police and getting out of your car and going to the police can cause you a lot of problems, but that is from where the immigrants from Africa are coming from. So with regard to my personal experience, if I can say, I would say that the incident that happened to my son at Lowell High, I think I would be very thankful because the Lowell police actually showed a lot of support, because I would say that my family and my friends organized a peaceful march in Lowell. And that went peacefully because the Lowell police protected us and guided us through. And that those who came out in support of my son and my family were not only blacks. If you looked at them, majority were whites that I don't even know. So they feel that this city is a city for all of us, and is a city that's working towards making everyone from all shades of life or background live well and coexist with the police. And I think that what I see here, that is some preventive move that can avoid what you are just asking, is the fact that when I walk around town, I see police walking and then riding the bicycle and going to the neighborhoods and talking to the kids. That builds that relationship, unlike a police just driving by in the car. You look at them as people from the other side of the fence. So once we interact with the police, and it makes them part of us, but let's not forget that when you take the uniform out, these are members of our family. These are members of our communities. These are our friends. They feel the pains like us. And initiatives like Chief, who organizing town meetings, bringing the police and the community to talk on issues that affect us, and the police listening to the community, and then the community listening to the police. I mean, it offers a lot of therapeutic environment, because sometimes we just need to air our anger, we just need to air our frustration. But when we see the police amongst us listening to us, and even the chief himself there, we feel that there is that bridge that's building.
Well, Chief Taylor, you were just talking before we started this about some of the new initiatives that are going on and some of the education that the police are getting. Can you talk a little bit about that and its importance?
Sure. Thank you very much for hosting this forum. I think dialogues like this are extremely important, not only in Lowell, but across the country. And it's through discussions like this that we're going to try and work together to build trust between the various communities that the police department serves. We do. And shortly after the incident in Ferguson last year really exploded on the national scene, myself and members of my staff realize the implications for the profession, for police work, and you know, without question, things like that play out locally all across the country, and Lowell is just one of those communities. So we used it as an opportunity to put back together at what had been previously called a Race Relations Advisory Council, and it had been allowed to kind of slip into just not being used very much, and I don't think it had gotten together for several years. We certainly thought it was appropriate to get that group back together and expand it and begin the dialogue in our community, because I may think things are great, but I only am one side of the equation. And so we wanted to hear from all the various components of the community. Lowell's an extremely diverse community, in addition to African American and African. Obviously, everybody knows we have a significant Cambodian and Southeast Asian members of the community, Hispanic, and increasingly even more diverse, we have Somali, Iraqi, and now Syrian residents of our community. So, you know, it's a very diverse place, and that's our strength, I think, personally, as a community, that diversity. So we got everybody back together, and we started these conversations. We've had, I think, 4 meetings. Most recently, about 3 weeks ago, we had the most recent one, which I think was probably the most well-attended. Probably, I think we counted about 80 people there. And it was a great discussion. And, you know, some of the comments and some of the discussions that we had were not pleasant. You know, there were people that have, I think, anger and some resentment, and that's good, but that's the appropriate place to get that out so that we can discuss it. And I think we certainly are going to continue those discussions as we go forward and try and expand them out. And you know, one of the things that came up at that meeting was to have more police officers there, and we're certainly going to do that. Just bring rank and file police officers into these discussions instead of just the, you know, people like myself and the command staff. So that they get to hear the community perspective. You know, it's very significant when you hear somebody in the community that is a person of color, and they explain to you that them or their family members have been had, you know, 15, 20 negative encounters with police officers over the course of the past several years, and then, you know, you sit back from like myself and I say, geez, you know, I haven't. Nobody in my family's had a negative encounter with a police officer in the last couple of years. And so you come to, you know, it's through discussions like that and the back and forth, and I think everybody comes to a better understanding. So that's one aspect of it. You know, as Paul said, we increasingly do training of all of our police officers on procedural justice, racial competency, implicit bias, things like that. And we're absolutely going to continue that. Just today, I will tell you that we sponsored a Smart Policing Initiative conference. Smart Policing is a federal government initiative that's funded and supported by the Bureau of Justice Assistance from the Justice Department at the national level. And we are a participant in that. And we're one of the examples across the country for a department our size of, you know, people organizations that do it well. And so they came to Lowell, and they brought many other police officials from around the country, and we had a 2-day conference talking about collaboration and building partnerships in the community. Many members from our very diverse community that we've worked with were there sitting on panels, and I think they did an extremely good job for the city, presenting how we do collaboration and how we build partnerships in this community. But one of the interesting things, there was a gentleman there, and I mentioned this earlier, that was the interim police chief in Ferguson, Missouri, Commander Andre Anderson from Glendale, Arizona. And he left Glendale on leave to go to Ferguson and be the interim chief for 5 months while they transitioned to a new full-time chief. And he explained some of the problems that they face, structural problems to the form of government that they have in those communities outside St. Louis, and then some of the challenges he faced and some of the things he did to get over that and try to start the collaborative effort between the police and the community. It was absolutely a fascinating discussion. He's a great person, he's a great man and a great police officer. I was fascinated by his remarks. So it's through things like that that we get a better understanding.
Yeah. So Masada Jones, how do you think the teens feel about relationships with the police and their interactions?
Just from what I've seen, I've never really seen a police officer approach a situation where they're ready to de-escalate. It's always this heightened sense of authority, where I'm like, I don't want to listen to that. And also, where I've had them, like, they first began, like, reprimanding the young person, then they start, when we as youth advocates and youth workers want to protect our young people, they've, like, also, got in an argument or, reprimanding staff as well. But it's always this heightened, even on the street, like, even if I'm at, like, my aunt's house or, anywhere, like, it's always just very combative. I've never seen them de-escalate a situation, so I can only imagine, like, what young people feel like regularly, because that's hard, even as an adult, where I feel belittled, like, oh, wow, so this is yet another condescending conversation with, an adult authority figure, where also I'm an adult, Yeah.
Well, so the training is there, the will is there at the top, but it's not coming through necessarily.
I haven't seen it yet. I'm interested, like, how long has this process been happening? When has this training started? Just because I haven't. And I can only speak from my personal experience now, what I'm hearing, but I just haven't seen it.
Do you have anything to add to that? Or?
Well, as a youth advocate and a youth worker, and just to kind of tailgate off of what Masada is saying, we work with young people. And a lot of times we know that if we come from that position of authority or an authoritative figure that is saying, I'm in charge, so you need to listen to me, it's going to backfire. It's not going to work. And I can tell you countless times I've had children throw violent tantrums, and I've had to remain calm. And as Masada said, de-escalate the situation. Now, I can't speak for the community here. I haven't seen many police interactions here. In Boston, I have. And there are a lot of times that I felt, as a child, I've witnessed police officers antagonize the men of color in my community that I grew up in. And it was very frightening as a child. And, you think, as Free was saying, you approach police officers with a sense of respect because they are law enforcement. And when you witness things like that, as a child, you think, oh, maybe if I'm just minding my P's and Q's and I call them sir, I'm never going to have an interaction like that. But that's not the case everywhere. And obviously, it's not all cops. But like I said, in the case with a child, if I was berating a child or antagonizing a child, one of my staff members would call me on it quickly. I would be held accountable for my actions. And I think that what, in my view, the Black Lives Matter movement and just the Black community in general is looking for is that accountability with those rogue officers who are definitely abusing their authority. And I think it's great that we have all of these trainings, and I think that it's really wonderful that we're doing that here. But as Masada said, I would like to know how long that's going on, and I want to know where else is that taking place, because as you said earlier, the structural changes in the government over in Ferguson were atrocious, and these things were going on for decades. And that's clearly an issue because decades ago, 50, 60 years ago, we were just getting voting rights in the Black community. And there are still people alive today who can remember those things, who may have even marched for their right to vote. So that happened, it's like yesterday. And the fact that, just think about the march from, Montgomery to Selma, or the reversal, how much they endured from the police just for peaceful protests there. They were beaten, they were hosed, their dogs were attacking them. And there were white people there too, fighting for their rights. And I think that's just, what we're looking for is accountability, transparency, allies. We have allies, we know that we have allies. And I think that we just want to know that we can be safe no matter how we are behaving, because we are civilians. We are not trained to interact with anybody. We are just people and humans. And we get that cops are humans too. But once you put on that suit, you took that oath. You chose that. I did not choose to be Black. And I did not choose to have to fear for my interactions with the police.
Do you think that some of this, the stepping in versus the stepping out, is because of fear? How afraid are the police when they're out on the street?
Well, I will say that I think several of the negative things that I've seen over the past year or two, where police officers have acted on video and haven't acted appropriately, right? I do see fear that I can recognize, that they either lack of training, lack of appropriate recruitment strategies, so that maybe we get, in some cases, getting the wrong individuals into the profession. But I think fear does play a role. Let me, and I just want to address one thing about the de-escalation. That's a very good point. That's a very key component now of any successful police training strategy, and we're about to embark on that. And we have done some of it, but clearly more needs to be done, without question. Because de-escalation is really, a cornerstone to trying to get that community buy-in. And it requires a lot of training, requires some structural changes in the organization so that we not only encourage it, but we promote it and hold people accountable for it. And there's two parts of that, though, too. There's the community part, where we have to go out and train the community of what, police officers would expect if they come to a confrontational situation. So each situation is unique into itself. A police officer may handle a situation at 2:30 in the morning when they've gotten many complaints about a loud disturbance. That may be handled somewhat differently than 2:30 in the afternoon. So I will say that. But what I can say, you go back to the fear issue of police officers. Chief Brown in Dallas brought this up shortly after the 12 police officers were shot there, which was a incredible situation for the police profession in this country. And I can't tell you how disgusted every police officer was in this country. But they're also fearful, and their families are fearful. And a police officer that comes to work, they're human beings. They have families. They have husbands and fathers and wives and things like that, and mothers and stuff. And so if they're coming to work and their children are fearful for them because of this carnage that they see being generated police officer, that is going to impact how they can do their job, right? You can't remove that. We're all human beings. So they are fearful. And I think Chief Brown brought this up, that he said, look, to some extent, we're asking police officers to do too much, right? When I first came on the job in the Commonwealth, there were institutions where a lot of people with mental illness and substance abuse issues were treated, right? We've done away with that it was decided, and I think probably appropriately, that there's a better way to do it. There's a more humane and a more appropriate way to treat those individuals that need our help. But the reality is you see those individuals in all the urban settings across the Commonwealth, and Lowell certainly is one of them. So we have to train police officers now to be, to deal with mental health issues on an everyday basis, right? That's one criteria. They have to deal with this incredible substance abuse issue, the opiate epidemic that we're dealing with. They're one part, they have to be trained to go after the people that are dealing the drugs and profiting at other people's demise. They have to be there to administer Narcan as a medical technician to try and revive somebody that's going to die. And then they have to deal with the families and the individuals afterwards to try and encourage them to get into treatment. Those are very complex social issues that we expect the average police officer to deal with, and then they have to, rescue people. They have to be prepared to do this myriad of activities which never seems to end. And then, now recently, we have to also train them to carry a rifle and protect the community against international terrorists. At some point, I think as a profession, and I think Chief Brown spoke about this, there becomes a breaking point. You can't keep putting these additional responsibilities and these incredible things on the police officer's back. That having been said, right, that's our job. Yeah. We have to do that. So as police administrators, we have to find ways to train them, give them the necessary tools and training to do the job. But it is an incredibly complex job in 2016. And you see major cities across this country, recruitment for police departments in some of the major cities is significantly down because of the realities that people face, that it's a very, very difficult job,
Yeah. I'm sure it is. I think it's important, the training that you were talking about, because what you need to do is separate real reason to be afraid from your own bias.
Right.
And so that people are treated fairly. Now, a lot of this has to do with structural problems in our criminal justice system that unfairly target minority communities. What are some of the things that really need to be changed right away in terms of the criminal justice system to stop recidivism and also just alienation and the concept in minority communities that they're being targeted?
Well, I think they're actually starting to do some of that. They're doing these diversion programs now, and that especially for youths, that they're trying to get it so that rather than put them into the system right away, that they're trying to take the youth and give them some other alternative in order to, so that they don't become part of the system, and working at it through that perspective. And that's something that is kind of new. It's only been around, I think, for a couple of years now, and I think it's working out pretty well to try to keep the kids that are on the edge from going over the edge. And so we need more things like that to try to show that there are alternatives in that, and instead of automatically having them go into the system and that, because some of these kids are good, they just make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes and everything like that, and so by trying to give them those alternatives, I think it's very helpful, and it hopefully will lead them on the right path as opposed to them becoming part of the system.
Yeah. Well, Masada, do you have any thoughts on what especially needs to be changed in the criminal justice system?
I would definitely say more resources, like when you're exiting prison, especially, just so that you know that you are set up. You kind of have a setup for things so that the recidivism rate is a lot lower. I don't think that even prevention, like doing prevention work, like I think that this whole like prison, school to prison pipeline, all of that needs some attention, and we don't talk about race like in school at all. Like the teachers don't talk about it. In Lowell, like I know that majority of the teachers are white. I've never had a teacher that looked like me. I know that my young people haven't, and I think that representation is super important. And if you constantly see that there's no one that looks like you within the school system, there's no adult in positions of power as a young person, like what does that do to you, But also like in school, if you're able to talk about certain things that you feel like are a struggle, or but teachers are inadequate in being able to make that accommodation for you, I think that that's problematic. Like, where is that pain coming from? Where is that discrepancy in school coming from? I don't think that all of those things are really explored, and that youth don't have. Like, I asked my young people if there was an adult in the school that they could identify, they can go to, if, like, say they were having a bad day. Is there someone that I can call and connect with, so that we're kind of on the same page and you have like well-rounded support? And they couldn't think of one. You know, and for me, I was like, wow, really? I'm gonna make phone calls anyway, you know what I mean? Because like I care about my young people, but that was for me very problematic.
So that's something that you see needs to be changed. Drew, do you have anything that you can see needs to be changed?
Well, but as a resident in Lowell within the community, I think it will be very important. Personally, I feel that 99.9% of the police are doing a wonderful job. But the community want to see the accountability of that 0.1% that do that bad job, that put the lives of the community and the lives of the 99.9% of the police force and the community at risk. Because it's that 0.1% that if they don't do something right, or they maltreat someone, then the 99.9% who do a good job and the community will suffer. So I think at this point, as a community person, watching what is going on, I don't think we've really had an answer that how can that 0.1% be held accountable by their action, because it is their action that generates all the trouble that goes around.
Do you have anything?
Yes, I would say that the solution is to treat them, if you're breaking the rules, if you're breaking the law, then you're a criminal. I don't care what your position is. If the policy is don't chokehold a man, then you don't chokehold that man. And if you do, then you be held accountable the same way that criminals in our communities are held accountable for their actions. I think it's a very simple solution. I think the harder part is dismantling institutionalized racism and the systemic oppression that has been a part of this country since its founding. And I really think that more education needs to be done all around, all across the board with everybody, especially those who are working with young people, as Masada said, because if you can't talk about these issues, if you're uncomfortable talking about these issues, or you have no information, if you're not informed about these issues, then how are you going to then connect with those young people of color? How are you going to make accommodations for those people who are going through these other struggles that you may not even understand? I have seen people who work with youth treat young people of color way differently than they would treat a child who is not of color, who might do the same kind of infraction. And I've seen that happen because they're expecting it of that child of color. Children of color are often treated, especially in the school system, at another disproportionate rate, with suspensions, school hearings, and expulsions. And what happens when you drop out of school, or when you don't have education, then you might turn to a life of crime. That's what happens with lack of resources. So I think the more education that we do for ourselves and for each other, for our communities, especially if you're going to be working in human services, you need to know about human history. You need to have that education. You need to have that background. Then maybe we could get to a point where we can get comfortable with the uncomfortable and have those conversations, like the community dialogue that we had the other day. Totally uncomfortable topic. However, a lot of people felt heard. A lot of people got their points across, and we definitely want to have those more. And I think that's really important that we're all agreeing that we need to do that, but it needs to happen on every level from the top down. It's extremely important to educate ourselves. And I think the more information that we have, the more power that we have. And I think that if we understand each other's experiences, if we just talk to a person of color and say, so what is your experience like? And be comfortable with the acknowledgement that maybe it's going to be different from yours.
But I beg to differ because I think the discussion here is about the community and with the police. What I have brought forth is that 0.1% of the police whom we are sitting and watching, and people have had these experiences, and some have even brought up, people have seen it, and then they have seen that it is carte blanche, that nothing is done. So if there is no accountability, that even within the community, that we can actually channel our grievances and point out some of these things, and these people are held accountable. And if they're not held accountable, we wait until something happens. Then people vent their frustration because, you see, they said that I would say that if I bring it up, nothing will happen. And it is that 0.1%. And that 0.1% is not just hurting the community, you are hurting the men in blue who are protecting us, who have families to go home. And then we are sitting and watching. How is this 1% accountable? Because I think if we have that solution, what people really feel the pain is that someone does something and goes away with it. And we know that it is that 1% that has generated and be the cause of all this anger.
What is the accountability?
Well,
Within the police.
we certainly investigate every complaint, every single complaint that we get, anonymous, video, phone calls, whatever we get, we investigate every complaint thoroughly and make a determination whether the officer acted appropriately or not. One thing I will say is in today's day and age, with instantaneous communications and social media, I think that has changed the dynamic tremendously, right? Because if you look at what happened in Dallas where those 12 police officers were shot, you will see that in that particular situation, you know, by everything I know professionally, it looked like the Dallas Police Department was doing an exemplary job, right? They had, over the past 20 years, significantly reached out to the community. Their community policing, their collaboration efforts were tremendous. They were doing a great job. They even, you know, coincidentally had a chief that a remarkable man from everything that I know, and he happens to be a person of color. But it didn't matter because in today's day and age with social media, instantaneous communications, something that happened in communities hundreds and maybe 1,000 miles away impacted Dallas, right? Because the individual used the Dallas as the venue, as the setting to, you know, take retribution against what he perceived to be an unfair justice system. So we're kind of all in this boat together.
Yeah,
you know?
I understand that, but there have been, for example, Timothy McVeigh, horrible murderer, white man, maybe even a white supremacist, I don't know, killed many, many people. But we don't say, well, the white community is out to get whoever he was out to get, I don't know, you know. So I think it's important that people really think about setting up a dichotomy between Black Lives Matter and police safety. They're not, it's not a zero-sum game.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
But I do, the point being, though, that I'd go back to this is that with the social media and the different communications that are available now, something that can happen well outside the community can impact your community. And I think that's the point. So I think we're doing a reasonably good job in here, in Lowell and the city, with our collaboration efforts and our police department. We can always do better. There's always going to be issues that we need to improve upon. But things that happen in other parts of the country certainly can have potentially significant consequences here, like they did in Dallas.
Sure, yeah.
Can I speak on that? So earlier you were talking about how a lot more officers are going into work with more fear. So that's something, like I said earlier, you signed up for. You put that suit on, you go and you do your job. I would like to challenge this notion and say, how do you think the Black community has felt when decades and decades and decades of historical violence has happened to us? Don't you think there might be a little bit of fear and people are cracking under the pressure there? And I'm not saying, and definitely I feel like the Dallas cops that were laid to rest, I feel like that was an incredible tragedy. And I don't think that that in any way was related to the Black Lives Matter movement. I feel like there are going to be extremists in any situation and that are going to use whatever positive thing you're trying to do as their source of angst or whatever. And I think this person also even said, like, I'm not really, I think they had some other issues. But I don't think those two things are connected. I don't think it's fair to say, you know, there's a heightened sense of fear with the police officers because of that, but wouldn't there also be a heightened sense of fear because of social media, because of the technological age? This is how, it's not just isolated incidents, and these things have not been, these are not new things. What's new is the cameras. What's new is that it's being filmed. And I'm sure that there are plenty of people in our communities, our parents, their grandparents, who can say, this is not new. This is something that's been going on. The only thing now is that we can connect the dots and see the patterns across the nation. And I think that's what's happening, is that people are now saying, whoa, this is not just in my community. This is happening everywhere. And I'm not, like I said, I do not condone the killing of anybody. I don't condone violence in any kind of way. And I think that's why the Black Lives Matter movement is trying to show that it is a peaceful movement with over 1,000 protests. And, you know, people want to frame it in this way that there are riots and things like that. But if there were riots, I'm sure that the media would show that. I mean, the media shows everything. So there's always going to be a place where we want to demonize something that is happening that is good. But to go back to this 0.1%, like I said, I don't think that all cops are bad. Absolutely not. I have a lot of respect for what you do. My father is a firefighter. I'm sure that he had fear every time he ran into a burning building, but he did his job and he did it well. And I think that that's what matters. Also, clean slate policy. I have that with my children. If they yell and scream in my face today, I cannot go back to them tomorrow with this sense of, all right, you were mean to me yesterday, so I'm going to treat you differently, right? That's not the case. Maybe there's been a history of crime in the Black community, but there's been a history of crime in every community. Every community of any race commits crime. But we are the perceived threat. We are the people who are treated differently. And that is very evident in cases like Dylan Noble, who shot up a church of peaceful people who were just going there to praise God. And he was given a bulletproof vest and Burger King. He was de-escalated very quickly. The motorcyclists who were in a shootout, there were a bunch of them. They were all de-escalated very calmly, not violently. And this is what we see time and again. So how is there not going to be fear in the Black community? It's not our job to not be afraid. It's kind of your job to do that.
Well, I will say this. I certainly have appreciation for the fear in the Black community. I absolutely believe that, and I'm absolutely categorically understand that. I've heard enough discussion from people who have been able to articulately explain to me exactly what you're talking about. So I do believe there's a lot of fear, and I think it's justified. I really do. But rest assured, there is fear in the police community right now. There absolutely is. I talk to the officers, and you know, and again, go back to one thing. They may have signed up to be the protectors of our democracy, but I don't think anybody envisioned that they were going to be subjected to what happened in Dallas. I mean, that's an extraordinary circumstances. Fortunately, it happens, you know, essentially very frequently.
But are they afraid of white men? Because about 70% of police officers have been killed by white men this year. So are they afraid of white men in the same way that they're afraid of Black men?
Well, I didn't put a race associated with that. I think what they're afraid of is being shot like that. I think that particular behavior has caused a lot of fear in the police community. Right?
That was one of the very few that have been publicized, is what my point is.
Well, no, I think we certainly get the updates on a weekly basis about the number of police officers that have been killed in the line of duty. So, you know, I do not want you to try and diminish the fear, because it is there. I talk to the police officers. They are fearful. And the other thing is their families are fearful, just like people in the Black community are fearful for their family members, right? Well, also police officers, they have the same kind of family situation, and they, you know, get fear expressed to them. So I think there's fear on both sides of the issue here, and I think it's through understanding that, right? And the dialogue exactly like this, that we both come to the same understanding that, we need to understand that fear on both sides and get around these issues.
How much do guns play in this? It seems like everybody wants a gun these days. Is there more gun violence now than there used to be, or?
Yes, the answer is yes. I think so.
Well, there are more guns on the street.
Yeah.
I want to say that first, like, for Lowell, I know that, is there something, first do you talk about what's happening with police brutality with your officers? I wonder if that's a conversation that you have, because, like, obviously this is a great forum for us to discuss this, but I wonder, is this a conversation that you have openly with them as well to kind of also explain what's happening in the Black and brown communities? Like, this isn't just the Black, like, issue as well. And we haven't mentioned women and children, which are also affected. Say her name, Corinne Gaines, who recently is in the media as well.
Her son's in the hospital.
Yeah, and her son is in the hospital. But I just want to know if this is like, it's a great that we're having this conversation, but I do think that it's one thing to take out in the community. I think that in all of our own communities as well with our families, we need to be having these conversations within the police department. This conversation needs to be had. Like, especially if you care about, like, I care deeply about Lowell. I am born and raised here. I'm sure I tell people come visit all the time. But I still think that these conversations need to happen because largely in so many of the institutions in Lowell, the leader of that institution is a white person. And like, even like, and that's still very problematic given that we are this melting pot, just given that we are this melting pot and we write about these magnificent things in our grants, which are very true, but at the same time, it's not as mingled as I would like to see it. And I think that these conversations continually need to happen. We need to talk about race and like, how does that feel for you? Have you thought about that? And like, one of the questions we ask in our Courageous Conversation is like, what was your first encounter like when you met someone who didn't look like you? Like, what do you remember that as like a young person? And like, try to just think about the different instances in which you had to deal with somebody that looked different than you. What was that like for you? Because I don't think that we talk about this enough. We don't talk about women and children that are affected as well. It's not, and the Latino community, like, this is not just a Black thing. It's a lot deeper.
We don't have too much more time, but I wondered if you could speak to whether the rank and file police. I know it's an integrated police force. Is there a pretty good percentage of non-white police officers?
Yeah, we're very diverse. We have several Black officers. We have Cambodian officers. We have quite a few female officers and that. But what I wanted to get into is, and you kind of brought it up, was that we do need this open dialogue amongst everybody. But we need to also bring everybody to the table, too. It's not just the Black community and the police officers. It's everybody. And you brought it up at some point, and you did too, as far as the teachers, and as far as, other people that we deal with and everything. And I've read articles about even your own doctors treat people differently, of different colors and races and that, than they do of other people. So it's a big issue that is not just us and you guys. It's everybody, and until we can get everyone together to make everybody aware that this is going on, they don't see that they're doing it. Right. This is their own. This is what they call that implicit bias, that they don't even realize it because they don't. It just happens, and until they understand that they're like that these things happen, the change is going to be slow coming.
I think you said that very well, and it really kind of ties up what we're trying to do here, is talk about race, talk about your own experience with race, and I hope that maybe we can have more of these conversations here at LTC. I know you're doing it with your Courageous Dialogues, and you're doing it with your community meetings, and let's keep it going. Here at LTC, communication is key.
And I hope that we should involve the city hall too as well.
Yes.
Because,
Yes,
you know,
and hopefully City Hall will be watching this show and get some good ideas too.
of course, because we talk very much about Lowell being a melting pot.
Yeah.
But the leadership doesn't reflect that melting pot. They should be able to do that. That is one of the things where if the leadership reflects the melting pot, there will be education on both sides, and then you'll be able to manage and control the diversity within the Lowell at a much understandable level.
Yes, and I guess that comes down to people voting. Because we have a democracy here, so we need to get out the vote and let people's voices be heard. That's, I think, the key. Well, thank you all so much for coming. This has been a wonderful evening, and thanks for joining us at home.
Thank you.